Welcome to this Executive Insights webinar on how to build high-performing advisory boards. My name is Jan Easton. I'm a fellow of the Advisory Board Center and a member of the Global Faculty. And I'm pleased to be here today with Louise Broekman, the founder of the Advisory Board Center and head of faculty and head of the Global Research Council. Welcome, Louise.
Thanks, Jan. It's great to be here.
I'm so glad to have your experience and insights on this particular topic around high-performing advisory boards, especially as it applies to really large markets such as the States, which is where my background is in starting out in advisory boards. So let's dive in, Louise. We'll have a little bit of a look to start off at who the Advisory Board Center is. The Advisory Board Center is the global professional body for the advisory sector. It started just over 5 years ago and supports professionals globally with a focus on best practice, ethical engagement. And if you're going to be in this advisory board space, how do you do it really well? And how do you build out that all-important global network of people who have really deep experience and expertise in areas that you might not have yourself personally? So what are advisory boards? There's some really interesting information that's been coming out in the market. I mean, advisory boards aren't a new thing, but it seems the way that businesses are starting to interact and adopt with them is quite new. It's often been called the hot new governance trend. Louise, I'd really value your insights into what you're seeing is really shifting in the market.
Thanks, Jan. I've been involved in the advisory board space formally since 2012. When you think about where the advisory board sector was then and where it is now, it's just worlds apart. Where we're seeing the shift in the use of advisory boards is around the best practice space. So previously, they've been really used in a very informal way. Now they're becoming a very important management discipline inside organisations, both in the business sector, where they want the support and accountability, but they don't want to lose control of their business. That continues to flourish. But where the new markets are around project advisory boards and corporatised advisory boards, where governance boards are leaning on advisory boards to do the critical thinking before they make decisions, because they just don't have the time to put the thought process behind it.
That shift, as you were talking about, from that very informal way to a more formalized way, I guess that really mirrors my own personal experience. 25 years ago in the first technology startup that I was part of the founding team, we had a very informal advisory board. And for a long period of time, I actually thought that's just what they were and that's how they should operate. And it was really a loose connection of peers in business that we would reach out to in a very informal way to bounce ideas off of and ask questions as we were going through a rapid scale-up phase. And when we were launching in new countries, you'd hope that you could reach out to someone that had a little bit of context about what that would look like and the best way to operate. And I guess that's really what you found through the research about how people actually engage advisors. They go through that really informal way of engaging all the way to the most formal way, which is what you were just talking about around formalized advisory boards and that governance board market or that board of directors style market.
Yeah.
So I guess if we really focus in those kind of different board roles, Louise, that difference between the governance board and an advisory board, really what's the core difference from what you see?
If we look at the most simplest terms of the difference between advisory boards and governance boards is a serious undertaking and the most formalised level of engagement with external advisors. And it's a serious undertaking, and rightly so, because decisions are binding on the directors themselves personally. They can go to jail for the decisions that are made or not made at the governance board table, but it's also binding on the organisation to be able to implement on those decisions that are made. Advisory boards are not a decision-making model. They're a problem-solving model. So it's not binding. So they're there to not reach a consensus. They're there to have robust debate, to road test their thinking, to evaluate the options, and to really explore the edges of a problem that they're trying to solve. But the decision stays with the organisation itself. What's been your experience, Jan?
Well, I guess that understanding, it's almost been like a light bulb moment for me personally, Louise, in my portfolio to actually understand. Often we talk about board level roles or board engagement like it's a pinnacle, right? It's at top of the triangle. It's where you want to reach in your career. And really understanding the advisory board landscape just opened up a whole new world for me. I've found personally the governance board route to be a bit constraining, not just because of the risk profile, but the difference in conversation. I feel where I add the most value is in that more open-ended, blue sky, problem-solving style conversation. And in my experience around the governance board's table, there just wasn't the time for that. It was almost often done in isolation before you arrived at that meeting, and then you need to have the vote, right? And I personally, once I discovered the advisory board space, my portfolio just opened up, and I thought the opportunity opened up for me to deliver that value in a different way. And so it's been really exciting. Governance boards may be in the future for me as part of that wider portfolio, but for now, where I can see that I can add the most value and contribute in a positive way that gives me a lot of satisfaction, but also gives a lot of momentum to the organizations I work with, is in that advisory board space. But what was important is I was drawn to the structure and discipline of governance boards because it helped me understand what good could look like. And I think that that's something that's been incredibly valuable about understanding what the Advisory Board Center has brought to this advisory board space, because it's not a new concept. There are a lot of people doing this in a lot of different ways. But if you're going to go through this process for organizations for the first time, or you're going to help organizations to maybe improve the value they receive from an existing advisory structure, it's really important that you go through a process to make sure that you've got a best practice foundation. So this advisory board journey is incredibly valuable about making sure you're covering off key steps along the way to make this a really robust, strong, high quality structure for the business to be able to leverage lots of value from it. And this advisory board journey is something that the Advisory Board Center takes people through in their advisory board education. But if we just talk a little bit about what you're seeing in the market in terms of what the most common structure is of advisory boards, and I think this most common structure is often what you see in the business sector. Is that correct, Louise?
That's right. So a business, when they've not had an advisory board before, they will generally look at an establishment phase. And the establishment phase is they'll recruit an independent certified chair first. And generally it'll take about 3 months to set up the protocols of the advisory board to understand what their priorities are, to evaluate the types of structures that could work, and then building out the foundations before bringing on the advisors. So an independent certified chair, generally the commercial acumen of that chair is really important in that really linking where they are now to where they want to be. They will then generally bring on 2 advisors, external advisors, and they will have between 4 to 6 meetings a year with that advisory board, with the chair working with them on a monthly basis. And that advisory board could be working for between a 90-day project advisory board through to a 3-year advisory board.
That term project advisory boards, I think that's really interesting, because advisory boards are just not one thing or have one application. And inherently that's the strength, but it also can make it a little bit tricky for practitioners in this space to be able to work out what type of advisory board might be best for a particular organization, or organizational executives to go through the same process. So in your research, you've really identified that there are 3 broad types of advisory boards that have different applications depending on the business size and also the organizational needs. Did you just want to maybe take us through what those 3 types are?
Yeah, thanks, Jan. The All of Business Advisory Board is when the advisory board is there to support a business owner in most cases around all of their business operations and their strategy. So it's about the strategy. Project advisory boards are when an advisory board is formed specifically around a strategy. And the A strategy piece could be around commercialisation of a new idea, entering new markets, sustainability, supply chain. So it's really a fit for purpose advisory board, and they're very handy in the market. Then you have corporatised advisory boards where the organisation has already a really well-formed governance board structure, and they build in advisory boards as part of the ecosystem of governance. So instead of talking about a governance board, you're actually talking about a governance system where advisory boards form part of that system.
That's such an incredibly flexible way to be able to, I guess, utilize advisory boards to really build good governance, right? It's that difference between the big G governance board and the little g. What's the best way for us to do things around here to make really good decisions? What's also interesting for my own personal portfolio, I've primarily worked in that business sector, utilizing project-based advisory boards with really early stage startup ventures, or those that are moving very, very quickly. So they often have to drive to a particular milestone or strategy. But what becomes interesting is with more organizations having to adapt to change, corporatized advisory boards also opens up a new way for me to participate in that space where I might not have traditionally wanted to sit on the governance board of those organizations, but being able to help those organizations adapt to the changing market through advisory board structures is a really exciting, I think, thing for my own personal portfolio to look at how do you bring innovative thinking and entrepreneurial thinking within often larger organizations. So best practice and ethics matter. And again, when we talk about light bulb moments, this best practice framework was incredibly valuable to me as a practitioner because it helped me to be able to harness the flexibility of advisory boards, but bring it back to some kind of common language or common touchstone to be able to really consider what is the most important principles that underpin best practice in the advisory board space. Louise, this has been a process that's taken careful consideration, consultation, and research to arrive at this. Did you want to share a little bit of a background on the best practice principles?
Yes, thank you, Jan. As you'll note, they are principles, not standards. So a best practice standard is more of a fixed approach and more process-driven. So the best practice framework is about having principles and ethical foundations to an advisory board so that it's not set into a structure that's inflexible. You have a framework of principles, so it could be then evaluated in that particular situation, an advisory board formed that's really fit for the environment that they're in, from a startup or a scale up to the business sector to a corporate environment. So the 5 key principles fall under 3 key pillars of purpose, process, and then people. So it's around clarity of scope that really informs the charter, structure and discipline and measurement. So you've got strong foundations of structure, but not constraint. And then you have independence and fit for purpose around the people.
What's been really valuable for me is this has actually armed me with some common language. So within the global community, to be able to reach out to my other peers and connect with them to be able to support advisory boards, we're able to accelerate the conversation because we have a common way of working together. And that common way of working together is not about sort of a fixed view of the world. It actually is just a common understanding of what do we value and what do the organizations we serve value. And from there, we're then able to really open up the conversation. So having things like a strong foundation allows it to be really flexible in the way that we implement advisory boards. But also the way that we work together, it's a really safe way of being able to work together, and ethics is at its core. And I think that that's something that was lacking previously in the market, where it sort of felt like just because maybe had done a few things in business or you knew a few things, anybody could sort of fly the flag and say, I'm ready to be on an advisory board now. So bringing that together in the Certified Chair Executive Program, this is the professional development that the Advisory Board Center has crafted over a period of time to be able to come up with a credential for the advisory board sector. So the Certified Chair Executive Program, all of your global practitioners participate in this program. They earn their credentials for this. And it makes sure that as people are advancing advisory boards and as the market is seeking this new way of engaging, that it's driven from, again, a best practice foundation. So Louise, let's just take a moment. I'll stop sharing my screen so we can open up the conversation. Let's just share some tips. So you mentioned you've been in this advisory board space for a long period of time. You are a practitioner yourself. What was really important to you personally about taking the time to actually research what good looks like in this space?
Yeah, thanks, Jan. When I first started, I really didn't know what I was doing, but I knew that I wanted to help other businesses like myself. I had an advisory board for my previous business, and it was life-changing for me. So to be able to then support other people in doing that was my primary goal. So I think if you can do that for me, what can it do for other people? I think what I know now to what I knew then is just the importance of the establishment phase. Firstly, a business, you can't sell advisory boards. They need to be educated around what they are and what good looks like. And then once they are ready for an advisory board, that the establishment phase is just critical. If you do that well, then everything else flows. And so understanding that the business is ready, what the advisory board is there to do and what it's not there to do, and then the frameworks to ensure that it's impactful, but then it's also safe at the same time. Things like establishing the charter well with the dashboards of the decisions that are being made around the structure of that advisory board, what the advisory board is there to talk about and what they're not there to talk about. Where is it the advisory board actually has permission to go to that's going to really drive the strategy that everybody's around that table for? And then the linking of those priorities to the advisors that are actually chosen for that advisory board for that period of time. And then most importantly, wrapped around that is the measurement of impact. So measuring where an organisation is in the starting point, and then at intervals either 6 monthly or 12 monthly to evaluate, has the advisory board actually had impact? And if the needs of the organisation has changed, to really evaluate, are those advisors still the right advisors for what their next is? Jan, you've also been involved in advisory boards now for a long time. What have been the things that you see are important?
Yeah, I think from a credential standpoint, the first thing for me was I thought I knew what good looked like, right? I had a pretty good sense of my own moral compass and trying to go through a process with care and consideration. But I didn't just want to stop there. I actually wanted to validate some of my thinking and challenge my thinking. And so going through a process like the Certified Chair program and actually testing out those credentials, right? And testing out my own thinking, to me was a real testament of this isn't something I just want to play at, right? It's not just something, it's not an ego style thing of people coming to me because of where I'd been in the past. I wanted them to see where I was going in the future. And the credentials was actually part of that. It was me investing in my credentials to be able to tell myself and tell the market that this is important and this is valuable. And I need to stay on top of my game, right? I need to be really sharp about what this looks like. I don't want to just trust, a Google search of what's a good charter or what does this look like? Because the interesting thing about this particular space is even though each advisory board is bespoke, when I was in my consulting career, that took a lot of time and mental energy to tailor everything from that very bespoke nature. And I knew if I was going to make a sustainable portfolio career out of this, I needed to be able to fast track the things that I could do and replicate those conversations without diminishing the value. And so having something like the Certified Chair program and the structure and discipline and resources that it provided to me was I can fast track a lot of those conversations in a way that's still really tailored to that organization, but I'm not making everything up each time, right? I'm not recreating things each time. The other thing that was exciting to me is, and I think it's the beauty of this advisory board community, it's not a cookie cutter style approach. It's not just sort of like a mill where every chair is sort of the same. This was really exciting from an adult learning perspective for me, that it wasn't about I had to unlearn what I knew before or what I thought about advisory boards before. I was able to actually build on that learning. And it's really becomes a challenge for me to deliver my value in this new context. And so I think that's pretty exciting because you reach a certain stage where you build up experience, you build up knowledge, and to walk into some place and them say that has no value anymore, you have to learn a new way of doing things. Forget everything you knew in the past and now do it our way. That's incredibly challenging. And it's also, it can sometimes feel a little bit offensive, right? Of thinking, well, why is this different? But what I've really valued about the advisory board community and even just the chair program itself, it's saying everything you know up until this point has incredible value. but how are you actually going to deliver this in an advisory board context, which is different to how you did it as an executive. It's different to how you do it as a consultant, and it's different to how you might do it as a director on a board of directors, because advisory boards are their own space. They're their own way of delivering value. And so that became a bit of a personal, I guess, intellectual challenge for me. And it's a process I continue to develop and continue to refine as a chair. No two advisory boards are the same. So I find it to be incredibly intellectually stimulating. It's a personal challenge each time for me to rise up and give my best to that organization I serve. And it's an incredibly supportive community. So when I find that I'm either not the right person or I might be moving into an area that my knowledge may not be as current, I can actually reach out to other people that I know share a common foundation. They share a common commitment to ethics, a common commitment to their own professional practice. And that's incredibly rewarding as a professional in this space.
Jan, you're absolutely right. The being the only professional body in the world and having this global community of people who are dedicated to doing it well and best practice, and then collaborating and sharing that knowledge. It didn't exist before, but now it's a way that advisory boards from here will just become stronger and better over time because that sharing of knowledge.
So, Louise, if someone was looking to either move into the advisory board space for the first time, or I guess develop their professional practice and build out their portfolio in this space, what would be the first thing that you would encourage them to do?
I think one of the things that I think is really important is really understand what are your motivations and what are your key areas of specialisation and what parts of the market will really value that. When we do a discovery process with the Advisory Board Centre for membership and to complete the chair program, our executives evaluate the people who are interested in formalising their advisory board profession. They sit down and take the time to really get to learn about the person, about their motivations, their areas of specialisation and the markets, and really evaluate with them, being a sounding board to evaluate, is this right space for you, and timing or not, and take that time to really think through, where does this fit in to my broader portfolio of work that I do.
I think that's incredibly valuable. And it helps people to understand, maybe they think they know about advisory boards. So they've been participating in this space for a period of time, but if they're looking for something else, it probably shows that what they've currently been doing may not quite be hitting the mark for them. So be curious about what else is out there, about how they can improve on their own professional practice or learn from what's happening in a global context in other parts of the world. Louise, it's been incredibly valuable for me to be able to sort of reflect on my own experience and share this time with you. So thank you so much for the work that the Advisory Board Center is doing. It's absolutely, I guess, transformed my professional portfolio to be able to participate in the Certified Chair program and connect in with this global community. So thank you.
Thanks, Jan.